Welcome to our channel, everyone. In our epic conclusion, you'll witness the daring moment where Commander Azera, the Ventari leader, finally stands side by side with diplomat Garrett Mason against the disruptive factions threatening to tear apart the fragile peace between Earth and the Dominion. It's a breathtaking standoff that tests their unity, their beliefs, and the fate of two worlds. Will they triumph, or will everything collapse in a final storm of betrayal? To find out, be sure to listen to the whole story. Every twist and turn leads up to that nail-biting finale. If you love immersive narratives full of action, intrigue, and unforgettable characters, subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any of our upcoming tales. And don't forget to comment below on what you think about this interstellar conflict. Where do you stand on forging alliances with former enemies? Also, let us know your favorite place to enjoy these stories. Your support and feedback keep us inspired to bring you more powerful adventures. Garrett Mason could not ignore the oppressive weight of dread that clung to the makeshift war room like a suffocating shroud, threatening to choke out every vestige of hope. For months on end, Earth's once thriving cities had fallen like dominoes under the relentless assault of the Ventari fleet, each ground-shattering explosion and howling storm leaving scorched ruins and traumatized survivors in its wake. The stale odor of burnt coffee and cheap disinfectant pervaded the atmosphere, mingling with the bitter sweat of men and women who had been awake too long, wrestling with the agonizing realization that they were losing. Even the flickering ceiling lights seemed dimmer, as if reflecting the morale of the exhausted diplomats and soldiers gathered there. In the center of the war room, a holographic display projected a stark image of Earth's continents, speckled with blue markers representing the tattered remnants of human defenses. Swarms of red dots, symbols of Ventari armadas, crowded the hologram, painting a vision of near inescapable doom. A single glance was all it took to see how perilously close humanity stood to complete subjugation or destruction. Some murmured frantic prayers to deities they had ignored in simpler days, while others clenched their jaws, bracing themselves for whatever final blow might come. General Birch, a man well past middle age but still radiating a relentless will, faced that hologram with quiet determination. Creases lined his face in a map of worry and hard choices, an expression made more pronounced by the stark overhead lighting. "We're out of time, Garrett," he said, his voice a low growl from nights without rest. "We've lost contact with half of our field posts in Asia and Europe, and the Ventari are demanding an unconditional surrender with a public statement of submission. They want to parade our final humiliation before the galaxy." His gaze flickered over to Garrett Mason, who stood in his tattered uniform, the only person left with credentials in both the diplomatic corps and frontline command. In those weary eyes, Garrett saw a reluctant hope, a plea for a miracle. The Ventari, after all, were an enemy unlike any humanity had ever faced. They didn't rely on brute force alone. They wielded advanced atmospheric manipulation, conjuring storms that could peel the flesh from a soldier's bones while leaving their vehicles intact. The battered records from the last fleeting months spoke volumes of Ventari might. They were taller, more agile, and far better equipped. Worst of all, they possessed wings that allowed them to control the skies in ways no human plane or drone could match. If Garrett felt apprehension, he masked it behind a stoic demeanor he had perfected over years of service. Taking a deep breath, he skimmed over the scattered digital briefs on his battered tablet, each line detailing another tragedy. Entire regiments ripped apart by precise tornado strikes, iconic cityscapes turned to dust, families torn asunder in the blink of an eye. "I'm no miracle worker, General," Garrett said, injecting as much steadiness into his voice as he could muster. "But if we can salvage any chance of survival, any measure of dignity, we have to try, even if it means meeting them on their own turf." Birch nodded, lines deepening at the corners of his eyes. "You're our last, best option. Maybe they'll respect you. Or maybe we can buy enough time for a strategic fallback. Either way, it's you or nothing, son." In that single exchange, Garrett knew his burden. He would be Earth's emissary, one tasked with convincing an unrelenting foe to grant mercy, or at least the semblance of a negotiated peace. Failure meant annihilation. Success, if such a word could be used, meant living under the dominance of a species that had shattered humanity's illusions of security. And so, with the weight of an entire planet's hope on his shoulders, he prepared for the journey that would test both his resolve in the boundaries of what humanity could endure. Despite the near certainty of catastrophe, Garrett found himself boarding a shuttle just after dawn, when the horizon glowed with the faint promise of a new day. The runway he departed from was little more than a crater-strewn stretch of concrete on the outskirts of what used to be a bustling city center. Broken skyscrapers stood in the distance, their silhouettes like jagged teeth gnawing at the sky. Every breath Garrett took tasted of ash and lingering cordite, a reminder that the war was still raging, even if Earth's defenders were all but spent. As the shuttle's engines roared, he gazed one last time at the battered skyline, steeling himself for what lay ahead, forging a last-ditch diplomatic lifeline to a species that had proven themselves unstoppable. During the ascent, Garrett scrolled through intelligence on Ventari hierarchy and culture. They called themselves the Kairosi Dominion, but humans had taken to naming them Ventari after their first scout vessel. They possessed an almost preternatural skill in atmospheric manipulation, blending raw genetic talent with centuries of scientific refinement. Recon footage showed Ventari soaring above human tanks, their wings catching sunlight like living sculptures. With a single coordinated gesture, they could whip the skies into a cyclone, tearing treads off vehicles and crushing anything caught in the open. Survivors spoke of them in tones of awe, as if they were demigods bending nature itself to their will. As Garrett's shuttle broke through Earth's smoky cloud cover, a second craft joined in formation, an escort ensuring he reached the Ventari flagship unharmed. Through the windows, Garrett glimpsed Earth's curvature, partly veiled by ash. Then he saw the flagship, a mammoth construct that hung in low orbit like a metallic leviathan. Its surface bristled with spires and lattice-like structures, each presumably tied to the Dominion's specialized systems for controlling atmospheric conditions in space. The display reminded him that humanity's achievements paled next to Ventari engineering. When the shuttle finally nestled into the docking bay with a gentle clang, Garrett inhaled sharply to slow his pulse. A long corridor awaited him, illuminated by pulsating lights that seemed to react to his footsteps. Determined to maintain composure, he disembarked, his scuffed boots echoing across an immaculately polished floor. A small reception committee of Ventari guards stood there, each over 7 feet tall, their armor clinging to lithe forms like a second skin. Their folded wings hinted at an effortless superiority that required no boasting. Clearing his throat, Garrett lifted his chin. "Diplomat Garrett Mason, United Earth Government," he announced. "I come to negotiate terms." The lead guard studied him with eerie vertical pupils and then gestured for him to follow. As he stepped deeper into the flagship's labyrinth, Garrett felt an invisible pressure, a sense that even the air was watching him. He recalled 4 strong points Earth's advisors had drilled into him: the Ventari's overwhelming might, humanity's resilience, the curious pull of ancient prophecies surrounding these winged adversaries, and the hope that real understanding might shift the course of war. Gathering what courage he had, he pressed on, resolved to represent his people with dignity, even if the odds of success were grim. The corridor curved gently, suffused with a soft metallic glow that emanated from hidden panels in the walls. Each step Garrett took echoed strangely, as though the ship itself were alive and registering his every movement. Occasional hisses of air escaped from slim vents, reminding him that he was aboard a vessel designed by masters of atmospheric control. After a few turns, he arrived at a broad junction where 2 more Ventari awaited, clad in armor etched with swirling lines that resembled stylized gusts of wind. One stepped forward and gestured for Garrett to halt, scanning him with a handheld device that blinked through a rapid sequence of colors. He stood as motionless as possible, acutely aware that any sudden move might be interpreted as a threat. Finally, the Ventari nodded and stepped aside, allowing him to proceed into a larger chamber. Here, the floor material changed from metal to a translucent surface beneath which flowed gentle currents of air. The effect was disorienting, as if he were walking on shifting clouds. At the far end, stationed on a dais of black alloy, stood Commander Azera. In that first impression, Garrett noted her height, well over 7 feet, and the fierce grace of her posture. Her wings, folded neatly behind her, shimmered with an emerald hue along the edges. She regarded him with eyes that glowed a subtle shade of turquoise, and her voice, when it came, carried a quiet, resonant authority. "Welcome, diplomat of Earth," she said, each syllable shaped with precise diction. I am Commander Azera of the Kairosi Dominion. You may call us Ventari if you wish, though we have many names across the stars. Garrett bowed his head in what he hoped was a respectful gesture. Commander Azera, I'm Garrett Mason, sent to discuss terms of peace. He swallowed, trying to bury the knot of tension in his stomach. I believe we both want to end the bloodshed before any more lives are lost. For a brief moment, Azera's gaze lingered on him, as if weighing the sincerity of his words. Then she nodded. We shall see if your convictions match your claims, she said. With a wave of her hand, she summoned a swirling projection in midair, an image of Earth, pockmarked with the scars of war. Scarlet lines indicated Ventari strongholds, while scattered blue indicators marked the last pockets of human resistance. Your people remain resilient despite overwhelming odds. Perhaps there is merit in preserving that resilience, rather than extinguishing it outright. The hint of curiosity in her tone was not lost on Garrett. He glanced again at the holographic Earth, fighting down a wave of sorrow at how battered his home looked. Resilience is our greatest strength, he replied softly. We just hope there's a place for it in your dominion. Azera led him through the holographic projection, allowing the swirling images to dissipate as they walked side by side toward an adjacent hall. The floor beneath them shifted from translucent panels to a polished surface etched with geometric patterns, each line accentuated by faint luminescence. Garrett realized this was likely some crucial sector of the flagship, a place where pivotal decisions were made. He counted at least a dozen Ventari posted at regular intervals, all wearing armor accented with different symbols, suggesting varied ranks or specialized roles. As they progressed, an undercurrent of tension swirled in the air. Although Azera's tone had not been overtly hostile, Garrett couldn't shake the sense that he was under silent scrutiny, measured by every Ventari's keen gaze. He recalled Earth's final directive: do anything necessary to secure a treaty. Yet he also remembered the strong point about the Ventari's unstoppable might, which meant he had to tread carefully. Forcing a confrontation could end in devastation. When they reached another broad chamber, Azera guided him to a table of dark, glass-like material. Sit, she said, her wings adjusting slightly as if to maintain perfect balance. Garrett took his seat, glancing at the minimalistic chairs that looked more like sleek sculptures than functional furniture. Despite the star-spanning technology surrounding them, there was a ceremonial air to these negotiations, as though he had stepped into an ancient throne room masked by futuristic trappings. Azera began by referencing Ventari core tenets: discipline, expansion, and adaptation. She explained how her people's mastery over the wind had shaped an empire across distant worlds, many of which had capitulated without the fierce resistance humanity displayed. You humans are different, she observed, tenting her fingers. You resist even when logic dictates surrender. You sacrifice beyond reason. Intriguing, but also problematic. Leaning forward, Garrett kept his voice steady. Our defiance isn't simply stubbornness. For us, freedom is precious. Even when facing overwhelming force, we cling to hope that we can negotiate, that we can be more than conquered subjects. Azera studied him for a moment, then lifted her hand. Instantly, a focused gust of air brushed Garrett's cheek, swirling around him before dissipating. You stand in a storm willingly, she said, her expression inscrutable. Is this hope, or is it mere desperation? Remembering Earth's battered cities, Garrett steeled himself. Hope and desperation often walk hand in hand, but I genuinely believe our worlds could benefit from cooperating. Humans have potential, inventions, perspectives that you may find valuable. If we're annihilated, that potential vanishes. A subtle flicker illuminated Azera's eyes, as though she found his answer compelling. Very well, she said. I will convene a preliminary council tomorrow. You will present your case to key decision makers. If they deem it unworthy, there may be no second chance. She paused, her wings folding closer to her back. For your sake, and perhaps ours, I hope your words carry weight. When the makeshift session ended, Garrett found himself escorted through a warren of corridors to a private suite. The living quarters were unexpectedly luxurious, walls softly illuminated by ambient light, a curved bed-like structure, and a console for communication. Even a small refreshment alcove dispensed liquid that, upon sampling, tasted like sweetened water with a faint mineral tang. Compared to the bombed-out husks humans called shelters on Earth, it felt like an impossible indulgence. Left alone for the first time since arriving, Garrett paced the suite's circular floor. Thoughts churned in his mind. Could he truly convince the Ventari Council that cooperation was more advantageous than conquest? Their technology clearly outstripped humanity's, and their mastery of atmospheric warfare bordered on nightmarish. Yet he sensed cracks in the Dominion's armor, especially in Azera's demeanor. She seemed open to logic, or at least curious enough to let him speak. That small opening might be all Earth needed. Yet the nagging concern lingered. How would the Council respond? What if they scorned his overtures and demanded unconditional surrender, complete with humiliating displays of submission? Garrett had witnessed enough tragedy to consider kneeling if it spared the rest of Earth from annihilation. But that decision was not his alone. Humanity would revolt under the yoke of slavery, sowing seeds of eternal rebellion. Could the Ventari ever be convinced that a cooperative Earth was more valuable than a broken one? A subtle chime interrupted his restless thoughts. The room's door slid open to reveal Kelran, a Ventari advisor with silver-streaked hair and wings flecked in subtle bronze. He offered a short bow. "Commander Azera has arranged for you to explore certain non-restricted areas of the ship," he said. "It is believed that understanding may foster trust." Grateful for anything that might help him piece together a diplomatic angle, Garrett agreed. They roamed the corridors and observation decks, each one revealing glimpses of Ventari life. In a tall, vaulted chamber, Garrett saw silent squads practicing a form of martial discipline, involving intricate gusts of wind that lifted them in synchronized flight. In another section, sprawling gardens flourished in columns of rotating air, the plants suspended without soil, fed by precisely controlled microcurrents. Kelran commented in a subdued tone, "We do not conquer simply for resources. Part of our ethos involves learning from every species we encounter. Yet, some in our dominion, like Commander Orvad, believe your people are too willful to assimilate peacefully. They fear you'll upset the balance we've cultivated." Garrett absorbed that, carefully choosing his response. "Earth can adapt. We've survived plagues, natural disasters, wars of our own making. We evolve under pressure." Kelran's expression remained unreadable. "Tomorrow's council session will test that claim," he said. "You should rest, diplomat. The path ahead is precarious." Garrett nodded, feeling the weight of every upcoming word and action. Tomorrow he would face not just Commander Azera again, but an entire assembly of winged conquerors whose decision could shape the fate of billions. Morning, or its equivalent aboard the flagship, arrived without the usual sunlight, replaced by a gradual brightening of ambient lights. Garrett awoke from a restless sleep, haunted by dreams of cyclones ripping through Earth's cities. The battered reminders of home flickered through his mind as he straightened his uniform, smoothing out the creases as best he could. He had to present a dignified front, despite feeling like a lone survivor navigating the teeth of a cosmic predator. Kelran arrived promptly, guiding Garrett through an intricate network of hallways. The gentle hum of machinery and the occasional hiss of pressurized air accompanied them, reinforcing that they were aboard a technological marvel. Approaching a pair of towering doors, Garrett could sense the significance of the chamber beyond. "Remember," Kelran said in a hushed tone, "you speak not just for yourself, but for all humans. The council will be exacting." The doors slid open, revealing a spacious council hall. A semicircular platform rose before him, tiered so that each Ventari official could observe from a vantage point. Commander Azera stood near the center, flanked by two figures whose bearing suggested high status. One had dark, obsidian-like wings that glimmered ominously. A Ventari Garrett guessed might be Orvad. Another, older yet commanding respect, was introduced to him as Elder Kamor, known for upholding certain ancient traditions. Azera nodded to Garrett. "Diplomat, you may present your argument." Taking a breath, he stepped into the open space, feeling every eye upon him. The hush was palpable, a silence thick with expectation. He began by acknowledging the devastation wrought on Earth, neither denying the losses nor glossing over humanity's struggles. He spoke of human adaptability, citing historical feats where Earth had unified during catastrophes. He described cultural achievements, scientific breakthroughs, and the potential synergy if the Ventari ceased their aggression. Orvad, as expected, interjected with scorn. You speak of potential, but your kind is disorganized. Your armies crumble under ours. Why should we allow you any autonomy?" His voice resonated with a dismissive undercurrent, and Garrett could almost sense the pressure of manipulated air swirling around the chamber. Summoning composure, Garrett answered that rebellious subjects cost more resources than willing partners. He emphasized that trust, once established, could elevate both civilizations beyond constant warfare. As he talked, he noticed Azera's expression shift, perhaps a flicker of intrigue. Even Elder Kimor seemed pensive, his gaze flicking between Garrett Weir and Orvad. When Garrett finished, a low murmur spread among the council. Commander Azera lifted a hand, silencing the murmurs. "We will deliberate and reconvene," she declared. "Until then, Diplomat Garrett, you remain under protective custody." A door on the far side opened, and guards stepped forward. Kelran gestured for Garrett to follow. With one last, steadying look around the imposing council hall, Garrett left, uncertain of whether he had sown hope or simply delayed the inevitable. In the hours that followed, Garrett's every thought fixated on how the council might react. Walking alongside Kelran, he probed for insight, hoping the advisor would reveal any cracks in the council's unity. But Kelran was frustratingly neutral, simply stating that each member weighed decisions differently. Some saw humanity as a threat that should be eradicated now, while others, like Azera, believed there was merit in forging an alliance. Orvad, however, made no secret of his contempt for humans. Soon enough, Garrett was ushered into a smaller meeting room, a place lined with slender columns that channeled moving air, creating a gentle, ever-present breeze. There, Commander Azera waited, her wings folded tightly against her back, reflecting an unmistakable tension. "Sit," she said, pointing to a curved bench of polished metal. Garrett complied, cautious. Azera studied him in silence, her turquoise eyes catching the chamber's pale light. At last, she spoke. "You argue that humans can be integrated, not merely conquered. Do you truly believe your people will submit to our oversight without constant rebellion?" Her tone was critical, yet not entirely dismissive. Garrett sighed. "Submission isn't the goal. Cooperation is. Yes, some humans will resist any outside rule, but if we're given a stake in our future, we can collaborate. Genuine peace always requires concessions." She seemed to weigh his words, then exhaled a gentle gust of air that swirled around them both. "Orvid's faction sees your kind as dangerously defiant, more trouble than you're worth. They question why we've allowed Earth to survive this long, blaming me for holding back." Her expression darkened as she paused. "And yet, something in me resists the notion of wiping you out. I sense a potential that we haven't encountered in many species before." A flicker of hope stirred in Garrett's chest. "With respect, Commander, I think you already know annihilation isn't the only path." Rather than reply directly, she walked to a nearby console, activating a holographic image of a swirling weather pattern over Earth. "Your planet's entire ecology is being reshaped by war," she said quietly. "Continual atmospheric manipulation has side effects. We risk ruining the environment we seek to control. That alone is reason to consider alternative outcomes." Garrett nodded gravely. The storms unleashed by Ventari shock troops had devastated Earth's climate, rendering large swaths of land uninhabitable. And your people must see by now that a ravaged planet is less valuable to you. With a contemplative look, Azera deactivated the console. "The council will debate again soon. I can present your proposals, but Orvad's faction is entrenched. They demand unequivocal submission. Let it be known, your refusal to kneel could provoke them to unleash an even deadlier wave of attacks to prove a point." Garrett met her gaze squarely. "If kneeling spares lives, I'd do it. But that only delays another uprising, another wave of bloodshed. Lasting peace requires a deeper transformation." Azera's wings unfurled slightly. "Then we must see if your convictions hold under true pressure. Tomorrow you will appear again, this time facing not only words, but the Dominion's elemental might." The next day arrived with ominous swiftness. Kelran escorted Garrett to a vast amphitheater within the flagship, where high-tier Ventari officials and an assortment of curious onlookers had gathered. Tiered seats formed concentric circles around an open central platform, its edges studded with vents that could channel wind into devastating gusts. Garrett's stomach churned at the sight, suspecting this was no mere formal hearing. Commander Azera stood to one side, her posture rigid, while Orvad loomed opposite her. Their wings flared in silent rivalry. At the center waited Elder Camor, who raised a staff adorned with swirling carvings, reminiscent of howling gales. The elder's voice boomed over the hush, carried by some acoustical trick of the chamber. We gather here to test the human's resolve. Our dominion is built on strength, shaped by the winds we command. Let him stand where storms converge and show if he remains unbroken. A murmur of excitement coursed through the watching Ventari. Garrett advanced cautiously onto the platform. Recalling that the third strong point from Earth's advisors involved prophecy, rumors that among the Dominion were those who believed in an outsider who would not bend to their whims. Was this part of that legend, or simply a display of intimidation? Elder Kimor gestured to Orvad. Commander, if you will. With a grim smile, Orvad nodded to 3 Ventari soldiers positioned around the arena's perimeter. They manipulated controls attached to their gauntlets, and the vents around Garrett hissed open. A swirling blast of air struck him, nearly knocking him backward. He managed to brace himself by planting his feet wide, arms raised against the roaring wind. Turbulence battered him like invisible fists. The air thickened, and for a moment Garrett struggled to draw breath. He thought of Earth, of the cratered landscapes and the defiance that had kept his people fighting. Summoning that courage, he forced himself upright. The gusts intensified, tearing at his uniform, stinging his eyes. Yet he remained on his feet. He heard voices shouting in Ventari, likely exclamations of disbelief. Azera from the edge watched with an inscrutable expression. Orvad's lips curled in a sneer. Another wave of manipulated air, sharper than the first, sliced the platform, making Garrett wince. Blood trickled where a flap of cloth had whipped his skin. But still he stood, refusing to kneel. At last, the howling subsided. Panting, battered but unbowed, Garrett stared back at the Ventari. A hush fell over the amphitheater. Elder Kimor rapped the staff on the floor. The human remained standing. Let us now convene to decide what this portends for Earth and for our dominion. Garrett barely had time to register the relief of standing upright before Ventari guards escorted him away from the amphitheater. Though his legs shook, he clung to an undercurrent of triumph. He had endured their tempest, a living testament to humanity's refusal to break under pressure. Yet he knew a single spectacle might not be enough to sway the Dominion. Kelran helped him to a small medical chamber, where a Ventari physician, a winged healer with hands that radiated subtle warmth, tended to the cuts on his arms and face. Their tools worked swiftly, sealing wounds with a faint luminescent gel. Despite the sting, Garrett managed to force a smile. "Thank you," he said, meeting the healer's curious gaze. She nodded without a word, likely unaccustomed to direct gratitude from a species her empire had nearly annihilated. Soon after, Commander Azera arrived, her demeanor laced with urgency. "The council will deliberate privately," she told Garrett, glancing over the fresh bandages on his arms. "Your demonstration challenged their assumptions, but Orvad and his allies will be quick to claim it was a staged display or that my subordinates held back." She drew in a breath, as if fighting frustration. "Our dominion admires strength, but politics can twist any truth." Garrett rose from his seat, carefully flexing his limbs to ensure they still worked after the onslaught. "Then the question is whether enough of them believe what they saw. If they need more proof, I'm not sure how else to convince them, short of letting them destroy me completely." A flicker of concern crossed Azera's face. "You have given them a reason to pause, which is more than any other species has managed under direct confrontation. But that does not guarantee they will choose diplomacy. Some factions thrive on conquest alone." Kelran joined them, evidently having monitored the scene from the corridor. "Elder Kimor has invoked older traditions," he reported. "He insists the council consider the possibility that you fulfill an aspect of Ventari prophecy, one that speaks of an unchosen Gale who stands in defiance. Even if many view it as folklore, Kimor wields influence. He will demand they weigh your survival carefully." Though skeptical of mystic legends, Garrett recognized the political utility in this prophecy. "If it buys us time," he said, "then let them believe what they will." Azera inclined her head in reluctant agreement. "For now, wait. If the council summons you again, stand firm. Meanwhile, I'll do what I can to steer them toward a negotiated settlement." As the guards led him back to a guarded suite, Garrett felt the weight of Earth's fate pressing on him anew. He had withstood the wind, But the real storm, one of shifting loyalties and political maneuvers, was only just beginning. Azera's attempt to sway the council began behind closed doors, leaving Garrett in a strange limbo. He found himself pacing at his assigned quarters, replaying the confrontation in the amphitheater and the swirl of conflicting expressions he'd seen among the Ventari. In the hush of his room, he felt both relief at having impressed them and an even deeper anxiety about what came next. Eventually, Kelran reappeared, face drawn in pensive lines. "Orvad is rallying supporters who believe you pose a threat to the Dominion's honor," he murmured. "He argues that if one human can endure our storms, perhaps your species has secrets that endanger our strategic supremacy." That argument resonates with many who cling to a more aggressive stance. Garrett exhaled slowly. "And Commander Azera?" "She stands firm," Kelran replied. "She pushes the narrative that your persistence is exactly why Earth should be brought into the Dominion as something more than a broken conquest, that your species could, in time, become an asset. Yet her influence is not absolute. Even Elder Kamor's invocation of prophecy only goes so far. The Council remains divided." Garrett recalled Earth's own histories, how factionalism, fear, and ambition had derailed peace efforts across centuries. The situation here was no different, except the stakes encompassed entire star systems. "Is there any direct way I can address their doubts?" he asked, desperation edging his tone. Kelran's wings shifted, the metallic flecks catching the light. "The Council meets again tonight. If they permit it, you could speak once more. But some wish to see you bow, physically kneel, as a tangible proof of submission." His words trailed off, loaded with meaning. For a long moment, Garrett stared at the pristine walls. Kneeling might secure Earth's immediate survival, but at the cost of undermining all he had shown so far, that humans would not simply fold. He thought of the battered remains of cities, the families clinging to hope in underground shelters, the soldiers who had fought to their last breath. Could he honor their sacrifice by kneeling in public? Or would that only provoke deeper contempt from the Ventari, confirming that humanity's defiance was easily snuffed out? "I need to speak with Azera," Garrett said at last. "If there's a path that avoids complete humiliation and still averts mass slaughter, I have to explore it." Kelran nodded, stepping away to contact her. In the corridor, Garrett caught fleeting glimpses of Ventari passing by, some glancing at him with thinly veiled curiosity or disdain. It struck him that, in their eyes, he was not simply an envoy, but a symbol, a living question of whether humans were worth sparing or simply another civilization to be swept aside by the Dominion's unstoppable wind. That evening, Kelran brought word that Azera had arranged a private meeting in an observation alcove near the ship's upper decks. Once again flanked by guards, Garrett followed through twisting corridors until he reached a broad viewport that revealed the planet below. Earth hung there, partially cloaked in swirling clouds, its surface marred by the scars of recent battles. Light glinted off oceans that had once been a source of pride and sustenance, now threatened by shifting climate patterns. Azera stood by the window, wings half unfurled, as though instinctively reacting to the cosmic vista. She turned upon hearing Garrett's footsteps, her gaze flicking to the guards in silent command. They withdrew to a respectful distance, leaving the two of them in a pool of subdued light. For a moment, neither spoke. Garrett took in the sight of her alien, yet oddly mesmerizing figure, tall and graceful, her emerald-edged wings catching reflections from the glass. In her eyes, he saw a complexity that surpassed mere hostility or scorn. She looked conflicted. "I've learned Orvad has threatened to bring this to a head," she said finally. "He wants you to kneel before the entire council. Full submission is a demonstration that humans will obey. If you refuse, he'll demand we accelerate the campaign to crush all resistance. Some even whisper about unleashing a planet-wide storm that would leave Earth uninhabitable." Her voice trembled slightly at the end, a rare crack in her composure. Garrett's thoughts churned. "Commander, my kneeling won't guarantee peace. It may only buy time. Earth's resistance movements won't bow down just because I do. They'll see it as betrayal, and your own dominion might interpret it as proof of our weakness, making further demands." She shifted her gaze to the planet, her turquoise eyes reflecting the swirling clouds. "Yes, I've tried to warn Orvad that forcing you to grovel will spark more unrest, but he craves spectacle. He believes your defiance in the amphitheater already undermined the Dominion's intimidation factor. Now he wants a reversal of that image, to show you broken. A wave of frustration surged in Garrett. This all feels like theater. There has to be a real solution that spares us from these public humiliations and mass slaughters. Azera's expression softened minutely. There is a small, carefully balanced coalition within the council that sees beyond raw dominance. They might be persuaded to override Orvad if you can offer tangible benefits. Some reason the Dominion should invest in your survival, share knowledge, resources, or something that dwarfs the cost of further warfare. Is there anything left that Earth can truly bargain with? Garrett thought of the encryption disk containing Earth's final defense codes. It was a double-edged sword. If he surrendered it, the Ventari gained unstoppable control over Earth's last protective measures. But if used wisely, it could also be a bargaining chip. There is one possibility, he said slowly, but it's all or nothing. They spoke late into the night cycle, meticulously parsing the details of what Garrett might offer and what the Ventari leadership would demand in return. By the time Azera escorted him back to his quarters, Earth's fate hinged on a precarious plan that danced on the edge of betrayal and salvation. A numb exhaustion settled over Garrett as he tried to rest, but sleep remained elusive. The summons came the next morning, delivered by Kelron in clipped tones. The council has convened an emergency session. Orvad's faction pushes for a final display of submission. Azera wants you to present your proposal instead. This could be the deciding moment. Garrett's heart thumped against his ribcage like a drum heralding war. Before he left, he quietly removed the small metallic disc from an inside pocket of his uniform. It was Earth's final encryption key, capable of activating or deactivating orbital platforms that could wreak havoc on the Ventari fleet if used strategically. In unskilled hands, it might also cause catastrophic collateral damage to the planet. One last weapon of desperation, or a token of negotiation. Minutes later, he stood again in the Grand Council Hall. Ventari officials filled the tiers, their wings shifting in restless waves of color. Orvid loomed among them, eyes gleaming like molten iron, exuding a challenge that dared Garrett to kneel. Azera remained poised at the forefront, her face a carefully composed mask. Elder Kimor tapped the ornate staff against the floor, signaling for order. "This council is prepared to decide Earth's fate," Kimor announced, voice resonating. "Diplomat Garrett, you stand at the threshold of surrender or defiance. Will you submit?" A hush descended, every gaze drilling into Garrett's solitary figure. He felt the tension coil inside him, but he remembered the 4 strong points that had guided him. Above all, the unstoppable might of the Ventari did not negate humanity's enduring spirit. He inhaled deeply, stepping forward. "I will not kneel," he said, letting his voice ring through the chamber. "But I do have something to offer, a way for both our peoples to survive without further devastation." An immediate uproar spread through Orvad's faction, outraged murmurs rising. Yet Kamor's staff rapped again for silence, and Azera nodded for Garrett to continue. Heart pounding, he held up the encryption disk. "This key controls Earth's last orbital defenses, capable of striking back with cataclysmic force. If we unleash it, countless lives will be lost on both sides. But we do not wish to use it. We wish to safeguard Earth and find a stable peace. If the Dominion agrees to equitable terms, this key can be turned over, ensuring no further threat from our planet. But we ask for autonomy within the Dominion's framework." The council chamber erupted in a burst of heated debate. Orvad snarled, wings flaring wide as he accused Garrett of bluffing. "You dare threaten us with your pitiful technology?" he spat, fists clenched. "We could unleash a global storm that tears your planet apart." Others shouted at once, either condemning Garrett's defiance or urging caution in the face of unknown weaponry. Amid the clamor, Elder Kimor raised his staff high, a gesture demanding order. Slowly, the uproar subsided enough for Azera to speak. "This is no idle bluff. Our own scans have detected partially active platforms in orbit, rudimentary by our standards, but potentially lethal if they detonate near our vessels." She cast a measured glance at Garrett, acknowledging the precarious risk. "We stand at a crossroads. We can call his hand and risk our resources in a final assault, or we can consider that perhaps, just perhaps, Earth's tenacity could be better harnessed than crushed." An uneasy silence followed, thick with the weight of looming consequences. Garrett waited, every muscle taut, as the council members exchanged tense whispers. At last, Kimor's ancient gaze fell upon Orvad. "Commander," the elder intoned, "if the Dominion engages in total war, we may win. Yet what would we truly gain from a scorched planet and lost ships? Such was never our highest purpose." Orvad's nostrils flared, but he remained silent. Garrett sensed the frustration pulsing off him in palpable waves. Then Kamor turned to Ozera. "You advocate for a negotiated solution. Summarize your terms." Ozera spread her wings with deliberate grace. "First, Earth becomes a protectorate rather than a slave state. They will be integrated into the Dominion, but maintain certain self-governance and rights to rebuild. Second, this encryption key is surrendered to the Dominion only after a formal treaty is signed. Third, the Dominion ceases large-scale atmospheric manipulation on Earth, limiting such measures to policing actions if absolutely necessary. In exchange, Earth shares its cultural, scientific, and strategic knowledge. We incorporate them under structured oversight, ensuring compliance but not eradicating their capacity to evolve." Low murmurs rippled through the tiers, some supportive, some outraged. Orvad's expression twisted with visible contempt, but he did not object outright, perhaps sensing the council's shifting mood. Finally, Kimor spoke again. "We shall vote. Majority rule stands. If these terms pass, so be it. If not, we proceed with conquest or annihilation." Garrett felt his heart thunder as small lights on each Ventari official's seat activated, registering their votes. Row by row, the data compiled in a floating display above the dais, red for war, green for treaty. With each blink, the outcome wavered. Then the final tallies froze. Green exceeded red by the narrowest margin possible. Earth had a tenuous lifeline. A hush fell over the chamber, broken only by the faint hum of Ventari technology. Garrett's shoulders slackened in immense relief. Earth had not been consigned to oblivion. Yet, the tension in the air remained palpable. The vote might have been cast, but implementation was another matter entirely. Orvad stood rigid, his dark wings quivering as if ready to lash out. With a glare that could cut glass, he turned and stalked from the dais, flanked by a handful of disgruntled allies who clearly intended to resist or undermine the settlement. Elder Kimor lowered his staff, letting out a breath that seemed laced with centuries of weariness. Commander Ozera moved swiftly, beckoning Garrett to remain at her side as she conferred with other council members who had supported the treaty. Kelron approached, offering a rare smile. "You did it," he whispered, though the undercurrent of worry never fully left his eyes. "Earth has a chance now, but watch your step. Factions loyal to Orvad could still sabotage the peace." In the ensuing hours, Garrett and Ozera worked in tandem, hashing out the precise language of the treaty's clauses. Ventari scribes recorded every term onto sleek tablets that glowed with intricate lines of alien script. Garrett insisted on clarifications, that Ventari occupation forces would gradually withdraw from major Earth cities, that a new oversight council would be formed with representatives from both sides, and that no further storms would be unleashed against populated areas. In exchange, Earth would cease any attempts to reactivate weaponry or develop new arms targeting Ventari fleets. The encryption key would remain locked in a neutral repository until conditions were met. At one point, Ozera paused, eyes narrowing at a subdued alarm flashing on her wrist device. "Reports of sabotage in the lower docking bays," she murmured, scanning the text. "Could be Orvad's supporters, trying to disrupt the treaty's ratification." Without hesitation, she called for a security team to intervene, then resumed finalizing the agreement. If Garrett had doubted her resolve, that doubt faded with every directive she issued, commanding, precise, and unwavering in her commitment to seeing the treaty through. When the main document was complete, Kamor convened a smaller signing ceremony in a side chamber, away from the prying eyes of Orvad's loyalists. There, under the luminous tapestry of Ventari iconography that depicted their storied expansions across the stars, Garrett pressed his thumb to a biometric pad, sealing Earth's acceptance. Ozera did the same. A hush settled, pregnant with the realization that an unprecedented alliance had just been forged. Kelron escorted Garrett back to the observation alcove, where they gazed down at Earth. The planet still bore deep scars, but perhaps a slow healing could begin. You have secured a measure of peace, Kelron said softly. But peace is fragile. The Dominion is large, and not all will accept this arrangement. Garrett nodded in agreement, remembering the four strong points that had anchored him. The Ventari's fearsome might, the resilience of humankind, the odd power of prophecy that lent a mystical sheen to their interactions, and the hope that a genuine connection, embodied by his evolving bond with Azera, could reshape a bloody narrative. Fragile or not, it's the best chance we've got, he replied. Later, Azera joined them, wings folded to navigate the narrow alcove. The moment felt almost surreal, human and Ventari standing side by side, gazing at a war-torn world they had decided, albeit tentatively, to share. We will begin evacuating certain outposts, she said, and Earth should halt any further attacks. From there, we see if trust can grow. Her gaze flicked to Garrett. This is no victory parade, it's a first step. Don't think every Ventari will suddenly embrace humans. He offered a weary smile. I wouldn't dream of such optimism. But a first step beats an endless war. In the corridor outside, distant commotion hinted that Orvod's faction was far from finished voicing its dissent. Yet for now at least, Garrett Mason's mission stood as a slender bridge between two civilizations once locked in a mortal struggle. They would rebuild or falter together, forging a future from the ashes of ruined cities and shattered illusions. And through it all, one truth shone clear. Commander Azera might command the wind, but the heart of a human remained a force no gust or gale could truly break. In the aftermath of the Council's razor-thin vote, hidden tensions began to flare. Orvod's loyalists, enraged by the newly forged treaty, plot a covert operation aimed at igniting panic on Earth. Meanwhile, Garrett and Azera must race against time to strengthen the fragile bonds of cooperation. As rumors swirl of a secret Ventari technology that could unravel the Dominion from within, both sides realize that survival demands trust beyond politics. It requires personal sacrifice. Amid hushed corridors and silent starlit observation decks, uneasy alliances are tested, old wounds reopen, and hope teeters on a knife's edge. Humanity's battered homeworld, still trembling from vicious storms, braces for one final tempest that could either seal peace forever or plunge both races into chaos. Stay with us to hear the complete resolution, and don't forget to subscribe, leave your thoughts in the comments, and let us know where you love listening to stories like this one. Your voice matters, and we're excited to bring you more dramatic adventures soon.